Hey guys, welcome back to the Readers. I hope you are having an amazing day. Let's get right into the stories. The first one is an entitled People story. I never thought I'd be writing one of these posts, but here we are. This whole situation has been such a wild ride that I need to get it off my chest. Plus, maybe it'll help someone else dealing with an overzealous HOA wannabe. So here's the background. About 8 months ago, I finally bought my dream property after years of saving every penny. I'm talking about living off ramen, driving a 15-year-old car, and basically having no social life for 3 years straight. But it was worth it because I managed to snag this gorgeous 1920s triplex in what used to be the historic district. The building is absolutely stunning. 3 floors, brick facade, original hardwood throughout. The top floor where I live is basically a penthouse with these amazing high ceilings and period details that you just don't see anymore. The catch was that it needed serious renovation work to bring it back to its original glory. The previous owner had let things slide for decades, so I got it at a decent price, knowing I'd be putting another small fortune into fixing it up. Now, here's where it gets interesting. The building sits in a neighborhood that has what they call a neighborhood association. It's basically a loose group that organizes block parties and argues about street parking, nothing too serious. But my building itself isn't part of any condo association or internal HOA because it's a single-owner property. I own the whole thing outright. The other 2 units are rented out through a property management company I hired to handle the day-to-day stuff. One of my tenants is this guy I'll call Dave. Middle-aged, works some kind of desk job downtown, and apparently has been living in the middle unit for about 6 years. He's also been on the neighborhood board for the past 10 years, which I found out later basically means he appointed himself the unofficial mayor of our street. When I first moved in, Dave seemed normal enough. He introduced himself, welcomed me to the building, made small talk about the neighborhood. I mentioned I was planning some renovations, and he seemed supportive. Said it would be great to see the old place fixed up properly. That should have been my first red flag. I started the renovation project about 3 months after moving in. We're talking full restoration here. New electrical, updated plumbing, refinished floors, the works. Everything was properly permitted through the city. I'm not some cowboy contractor trying to cut corners. I hired a team that specializes in historic properties, and we went through all the proper channels. The crown jewel of the project was going to be this incredible floor-to-ceiling arched window for my living room. The original had been bricked over sometime in the 1970s, probably during the energy crisis. My contractor found the old photos from the city archives showing what it used to look like. We had a specialty window company create an exact replica using period-appropriate materials, but with modern soundproofing and energy efficiency. This wasn't some random home improvement whim. The window was going to be the centerpiece of the whole restoration. Custom made, cost me about $8,000, and looked absolutely perfect with the building's original architecture. The installation was scheduled for a Saturday morning in early October. Beautiful day, crisp fall weather. Perfect for having the crew work on the exterior. I was up early, coffee in hand, watching these guys carefully remove the old brick and prepare the opening. That's when Dave decided to make his entrance. I heard this heavy pounding on my door around 9 in the morning. Not knocking, pounding, like someone was trying to break the door down. I figured maybe there was an emergency or something, so I rushed over to see what was going on. I opened the door and there's Dave, red in the face, holding this official-looking piece of paper. He didn't say hello. Didn't ask how I was doing, just shoved this paper at me and started talking. He told me this was a notice of violation for unauthorized exterior modifications. Started going on about how my window was destroying the visual continuity of the facade and violating Section 4.2 of the neighborhood bylaws. Said I had until Monday to remove it or face $500 per day in fines. I was honestly confused at first. I tried to explain that I had all the proper permits from the city, that the window was actually restoring the building to its original appearance, but Dave just cut me off. He said that city permits didn't matter because the HOA had final approval over all exterior modifications, that I should have submitted my plans to the Architectural Review Committee before starting any work. He was getting more and more worked up as he talked, waving his hands around and raising his voice. Then he tried to push past me into my apartment. He said he needed to inspect the interior framing to make sure I wasn't compromising the structural integrity of the building, that as a board member, he had the right to examine any modifications that might affect other units. That's when I realized this guy was completely out of line. I blocked the doorway and told him he wasn't coming into my home without my permission. That if he had concerns about structural issues, he could contact the city inspector who had already signed off on the work. Dave got this smug look on his face. He told me I was making a big mistake, that he'd been living here for 6 years and knew exactly how the board operated. Said I was just another renter who thought they could do whatever they wanted without consequences. Here's the key part. Dave assumed I was a tenant just like him. In his mind, we were both renters dealing with some faceless landlord who owned the building. He had no idea that I was actually that landlord. I decided not to correct his assumption. Something about his whole attitude rubbed me the wrong way. The way he was trying to bully me, acting like he had some kind of authority he clearly didn't have. So I just told him I had all the proper permits and wasn't stopping the work. That seemed to really set him off. He said I'd be hearing from the board soon and stormed back downstairs. I could hear him on his phone in the hallway, already making calls. The window installation continued without any other interruptions. The crew did an amazing job. By the end of the day, I had this absolutely gorgeous floor-to-ceiling window that perfectly matched the building's original 1920s character. The afternoon light streaming through it was incredible. But Dave wasn't done. On Sunday evening, I got an email from him with the subject line, "Final warning, compliance required." He'd apparently called some kind of emergency meeting of the neighborhood board and somehow convinced a city building inspector to come out Monday morning at 10. The email was incredibly condescending. He said he was giving me one last chance to voluntarily remove the window before the board had to take official action, that he'd already prepared the paperwork for placing a lien on the property for unpaid fines. He seemed to think this was going to be my last day with the window. Reading that email, I started to understand what had been happening in the neighborhood for years. Dave had been using his position on the neighborhood board to intimidate other residents into following rules that didn't actually exist. The neighborhood association had no authority over individual property modifications. They could suggest guidelines and organize community events, but they couldn't enforce architectural standards on private buildings. I did some research that night, pulled out my property deed, reviewed the neighborhood association charter, looked up the relevant city ordinances. Everything confirmed what I already knew. Dave had absolutely zero authority over my window or any other modifications I made to my own building. But I decided to let him have his little moment of triumph. Sometimes the best way to deal with a bully is to let them dig their own grave. Monday morning arrived right on schedule. I was having my coffee behind my beautiful new window when I saw Dave setting up on the sidewalk. He had a folding table, a clipboard, and two other elderly people who I assumed were his fellow board members. There was also a guy in a city inspector's vest who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else. Dave had apparently told the inspector that there was an illegal structure being added to a condo building without proper HOA approval. The inspector later told me he'd been expecting to find some kind of major code violation based on Dave's description. I watched the whole setup from my window while I finished my coffee. Dave was clearly in his element, organizing papers and pointing up at my building. This was his big moment to show everyone what happens when you don't follow his rules. When they were all ready, Dave looked up at my window and made this exaggerated gesture for me to come down, like he was summoning me to face judgment. I took my time getting ready, put on a nice button-down shirt and khakis, grabbed my leather portfolio that I keep all my important documents in. Then I walked downstairs to face the music. Dave immediately launched into his presentation. He had charts showing the disruption to neighborhood aesthetic harmony. He quoted sections from various documents about maintaining visual consistency and community standards. He talked about property values and historical preservation and resident consensus. The whole performance went on for about 5 minutes. Dave was clearly enjoying himself, playing to his audience of 2 board members and one very confused city inspector. He kept referring to me as the tenant and talking about how renters needed to understand their responsibilities to the community. Finally, he wrapped up his big speech by turning to the inspector and saying that as the representative of the building's condo association, he was formally requesting that this illegal modification be ordered removed immediately. That's when I opened my portfolio. I handed the inspector a folder containing 3 documents. First was my general warranty deed showing that I owned the entire building free and clear. Second was the master lease agreement showing that Dave was actually my tenant through the property management company. Third were the city-approved permits for the specific window installation, complete with architectural drawings and structural engineering reports. The inspector looked through everything carefully while Dave kept talking. I could see the exact moment when the inspector realized what was happening. His eyebrows went up and he got this look on his face like he was trying not to laugh. He turned to Dave and explained that this was a private residence, not a condo association property, that the neighborhood board had no jurisdiction over architectural modifications to individual buildings, that all the proper permits had been filed and approved, and that honestly, Dave was lucky I hadn't already started eviction proceedings for harassment. Dave's face went through this amazing transformation. Started out confident red and slowly drained to this sickly white color as he realized what had just happened. The other board members immediately started backing away from the whole situation. One of them actually apologized to me and said they had no idea Dave had misrepresented the facts about the property. The inspector packed up his stuff and left, but not before telling Dave that filing false reports about code violations was a serious offense that could result in fines. He also suggested that Dave might want to review his understanding of property law before making any more official complaints. After everyone else had gone, Dave and I stood there on the sidewalk for a minute. He was clearly trying to process what had just happened. Finally, he asked if I was really the owner of the building. I confirmed that yes, I had purchased the property 8 months ago and was his landlord, that the property management company handled the day-to-day rental operations, but major decisions went through me. Dave started stammering out some kind of apology, but I cut him off. Told him we'd discuss this later after I had a chance to review his lease agreement and the building's policies on tenant harassment. That wasn't exactly true. I had no intention of evicting Dave over this incident. That would have been overkill, and honestly, I'm not that vindictive, but I wanted him to sweat a little bit. What I did do was send a formal notice through the property management company about a rent increase. Nothing excessive, just enough to cover what I called additional administrative costs related to tenant-initiated legal consultations. Perfectly legal under the terms of his lease and well within the allowable annual increase percentage for our area. I also had a conversation with the property manager about updating the building policies to clarify that tenants had no authority to speak on behalf of the property owner or to make representations about building management to outside parties. The neighborhood board held an emergency meeting later that week. Without going into all the details, Dave was asked to step down from his position. Apparently, the window incident wasn't the first time he'd overstepped his authority, just the most dramatic. Several other neighbors came forward with stories about Dave trying to enforce non-existent rules and threatening people with fines he had no power to collect. The whole thing became a bit of a neighborhood legend. People still bring it up at block parties. Someone even made a joke about it in the neighborhood newsletter, talking about the importance of understanding the difference between suggestions and enforceable regulations. As for Dave, he lasted about 3 more months in the building. When his lease came up for renewal, I decided not to extend it. Nothing personal, but after everything that had happened, I thought it would be better for everyone if he found a new place. Somewhere that maybe had an actual HOA where he could exercise his passion for community oversight in an appropriate context. The last time I saw him, he was loading boxes into a moving truck on a cold February morning. I was sitting in my living room behind my beautiful arched window, drinking coffee and watching the snow fall. He looked up at the window once before driving away. I gave him a little wave. The renovation project turned out amazing. The window is absolutely perfect and really ties the whole restoration together. I've had several people stop by just to admire the craftsmanship. The city's Historic Preservation Society even featured the building in their annual newsletter as an example of how to properly restore period architecture. I learned a lot from this whole experience, mainly that there's a big difference between actual authority and the authority people think they have. Dave had been getting away with his little power trips for years because nobody had bothered to challenge him. But as soon as someone with actual legal standing pushed back, his whole house of cards collapsed. I also learned to be more careful about tenant screening. The property management company now does a more thorough background check that includes questions about involvement in neighborhood associations and any history of disputes with landlords or other tenants. But mostly, I learned that sometimes the best revenge is just letting people reveal who they really are. Dave did all the work himself. I just provided the paperwork. The neighborhood is actually much more peaceful now. The new board leadership focuses on things that actually matter, like organizing community events and maintaining the common areas. Nobody tries to measure grass height with rulers or issue fake violation notices anymore. And every morning when I have my coffee behind that beautiful window, I remember why I worked so hard to buy this place. It's not just about owning property. It's about having a space that's truly yours, where nobody can tell you what you can or cannot do, as long as you follow the actual laws and regulations. Dave learned that lesson the hard way, but hopefully it stuck. Maybe in his new place, he'll focus on being a good neighbor instead of trying to be the neighborhood dictator, though somehow I doubt it. Some people never change. As I'm writing this, I can see the sunset through my restored window, casting these amazing patterns of light across the original hardwood floors. The whole building is exactly what I envisioned when I first saw those old photos from the city archives. Historic character preserved, modern amenities integrated seamlessly, and most importantly, nobody trying to tell me what I can or cannot do with my own property. The property management company tells me they've had several inquiries about Dave's old unit. Apparently word has gotten around that this is a well-managed building with a hands-on owner who doesn't tolerate nonsense. I'm being more selective this time about who I rent to, looking for people who understand the difference between community involvement and community interference. There's talk in the neighborhood about updating the association bylaws to prevent future incidents like this, clarifying the scope of the board's authority and establishing better procedures for handling complaints about private property modifications. I've offered to help with that process, given my recent education in property law and neighborhood governance. The whole experience has made me more involved in the actual legitimate community activities. I've joined the planning committee for the summer block party and volunteered to help with the neighborhood cleanup day. Turns out there are plenty of ways to be a good neighbor without trying to control what everyone else does with their property. Looking back, I almost feel sorry for Dave. Almost. He clearly had some need to feel important and in control, and the neighborhood board position gave him an outlet for that. But when you base your authority on intimidation and misinformation, it's only a matter of time before someone calls your bluff. I hope wherever he ended up, he found a more constructive way to channel that energy. Maybe a place with a real HOA where his attention to detail could be properly utilized. Or maybe he learned to focus on his own property instead of everyone else's. Either way, it's not my problem anymore. I've got my beautiful restored building, my gorgeous period-accurate window, and a much better understanding of property rights and tenant relations, plus a story that never fails to entertain people at dinner parties. The moral of the story, I guess, is that knowledge really is power. Dave thought he had power because he'd been getting away with his bullying for years, but real power comes from actually understanding the law and having the documentation to back up your position. Oh, and always read the fine print. If Dave had bothered to find out who actually owned the building before launching his little power play, he could have saved himself a lot of embarrassment, but then again, if he'd been that careful, he probably wouldn't have been the type to pull this stunt in the first place. I still laugh sometimes when I think about the look on his face when the inspector explained that he'd been trying to cite his own landlord for lease violations. Classic. The next one is a malicious compliance story. About 10 years ago, I worked for a small web hosting company. Initially, I was hired as entry-level support, taking calls from customers that accidentally broke their websites or needed passwords reset. Then I worked my way up to team lead, where I was working with SSL certificates and cloud hosting accounts for high-value customers. Finally, they moved me to the marketing team after they found out that I had an English writing degree. This was my first copywriting job and a huge step in my career, as I am still a copywriter to this day. I remember being overjoyed when I accepted the position and thought, I'm never taking another angry phone call for the rest of my life. Cut to about a year later, I'm writing blogs, emails, video scripts, and most importantly, not taking phone calls. I'm at my desk in the marketing department, and in walks the team lead that took my position after I was promoted. We'll call her Ruth. Side note, I objected to Ruth being promoted into my old role because she's extraordinarily bullheaded and rude. She would repeatedly overstep her bounds as an entry-level tech, telling other employees when they could and couldn't go to lunch and trying to manage the call queue when her only job was to take said calls. Ultimately, my concerns went unheeded and she got the job. Ruth walks up to my desk and sets a bulleted list in front of me. It's a vague business strategy she's written up. Essentially, the cloud hosting division of the company is rapidly expanding, and the CSO tasked Ruth with figuring out how to field all of the additional high-value customers. Ruth's solution? I resume some of my responsibilities as a tech team lead to take escalations from angry cloud customers. I said absolutely not. She completely ignored me and just kept going over her strategy. Like, literally, I'm saying, no, Ruth, I'm not doing this. And she's like, anyway, as you can see here, when a tech needs to escalate a call, it will come to you. I was fuming, but patiently explained that I was on the marketing team now, and my tech support days are over. She said, well, I checked the roles and responsibilities section in the company handbook, and there's nothing that says the marketing team doesn't work directly with clients. She then gave me a shit-eating grin and says, we'll have to get a phone installed at your desk, and leaves. I was fucking livid. I'd be going from no phone calls to specifically only taking calls from the angriest customers we have. Then, as I was recounting this awful situation to one of the graphic designers, something dawned on me when I remembered what she said about the roles in the company handbook. As the only copywriter, I was the one in charge of managing and updating the handbook. The graphic designer saw this dawn of realization on my face and was like, oh man, please do what I think you're gonna do. So I logged into Evernote, or whatever system we were using to manage and edit the handbook, and added a subsection to the marketing team's roles and responsibilities that specifically said we do not take phone calls, emails, or have any direct interactions with customers. This also safeguarded the graphic designers and videographers from any future bullshit from Ruth. I took the changes to the CSO, who gave me a smirk and signed off on the edits. I then took the signed changes to Ruth and set them on her desk. Yeah, actually, it does say in the company handbook that the marketing team can't take calls, as you can see here. I guess you'll have to figure something else out. She stared daggers at me, but I just shrugged and left. That was the last of our interactions. She ended up poaching some top performers from the entry-level tech team to make a dedicated cloud team that never really functioned well, and she ultimately quit without a 2-week notice a few months later. So I got some extra "I told you so" satisfaction about her not being qualified for the job as well. I still haven't taken a single customer phone call since I became a copywriter, and I intend to keep it that way. The next one is an entitled people story. My dad, 70M, expects me, 40F, to take care of him. Am I wrong if I don't want to? I think I need to vent. I'll give a little context. I'll try not to be long. He wants me to act like he's been a good present father, but he hasn't. He's stuck on memories before the accident that I don't remember. At the age of 8, I was involved in a car accident that included my mom and my siblings. Drunk driver hit us. She didn't make it. I became a paraplegic. He was there at the hospital a lot right after the accident, but that lasted maybe 6 weeks. And then I maybe saw him once a week for the remainder of my 4-month hospital stay. After, I went to stay with my grandparents, maternal. Before, I was staying with my mom and dad, in the home I would eventually move to. After leaving the hospital, I maybe saw him 3 times a month for the first year, then less frequent. Kicker is, he stayed in the same neighborhood, and would often pass our house to exit. Sometimes he would stop by to say hello and chit-chat, others he would just drive by. He wasn't in charge of my care, no doctor.apps, physical therapy, school, etc. My grandparents was my safe place. My rock. I love and miss them dearly. They helped me adjust to my new limitations and loss of my mom, trying all they could not make me feel like I was missing anything, and helped me to become the stable, independent woman I am today. My grandmother eventually became my guardian. At 14, he was sentenced to jail on a drug charge, 15 wires. According to him, hanging with the wrong people at the wrong time. I felt bad for him, but by that time I didn't miss him. He wasn't really involved in my life much already for a few years. If I had a problem, needed anything, relied on anyone, it wasn't him I was going to. I did receive a settlement from the accident, which is why I think that he started to share that he needed money for better lawyers and commissary when I was 16. This carried on until he was released, when he then expected to move in with me. By that time, I, 29, accomplished a lot. Although I'm a paraplegic, I'm really independent. I graduated, learned a trade, did a few years of college, was working and living alone. Doing pretty good for someone that doctors stated I may not finish grade school due to my head injury. I had moved into my family home that was abandoned for a few years and needed a lot of work. It took a lot of money to make it livable and accessible. He never made any modifications, not even for me to access the home. Over the years, he pressured, guilted, manipulated me lots about money. It was extremely stressful and panic-inducing. I assumed that he thought I still had enough to take care of both me and him. He can't remember settlement details, and I will never tell. I work to save. As I age, I may need more help. I'm single, no children, and if can help it, I don't want to be a burden. Currently in therapy, dealing with some issues in relation to him, like abandonment and self-worth. He has vaguely apologized about how he treated us. He really only likes to address his hardships and pain, like I don't wake up every day with my own. I was on the fence about letting him move, in part because he held the title of father. I was pressed by some family members and was finding my way in line with my faith. I've been advised by some not to let him in for my mental health and financial stability. He hasn't had an official job since his release, any savings or social security. He was staying with his family and friends, no rent, and never kicked out, until he decided to leave the last friend to stay somewhere he had to pay rent with no real job. Always complaining about how hard life is. Now he expects me and my brother to care for all his needs. My brother doesn't talk to him. And for the last few weeks I don't, after the last try of guilt, manipulation, and insulting. I understand he's desperate and pitiful, but I think I'm done. Am I wrong? Looking for advice and maybe some support. The next one is an entitled parent story. Me and my husband had a disagreement about who should stay with us after the birth of our baby, whether his mom or my mom or both. The presence of a grandmother was mainly needed to help in childcare and new mom care. My mother-in-law has a habit of finding flaws in everything anyone does and is always a victim in every situation. She is always brooding about how life has been unfair to her as she had a strict mother-in-law, and her own daughter, my husband's elder sister, has a terrible marriage, and how her mother-in-law is an evil witch and makes my sill slog. The only thing running in my mother-in-law's mind is bitterness towards anyone who seems to have a speck of happiness in their marital life. She disses women who have undergone C-section surgery as they chose the easy way out. She calls the women of today's generation weak and selfish as they are not undergoing the pains of the labor. Yada yada. Many other things that will make your blood boil. Anyway, my husband said he couldn't hurt his mom by not having her here during the birth of her first grandchild, and that he is her only son, and she will feel alienated if we don't call her. I think she wanted to be here only to assert her importance and preach about how great a mother she has been because she feels irrelevant in her children's life. Cut to the birth of my daughter. My mom and mother-in-law are both in our house. I needed my mom because I was not comfortable with anyone except my own mother about how my body looked. My baby could not latch, and we got whichever pump everyone around was using. I got a pre-loved Spectra, and my mother-in-law once happened to see how it pumped milk. She laughed at my face and called me a cow. She had never seen a pump before, but I don't think that's the right thing to say to a woman who is grieving the loss of her figure and missing her old self so much. I hadn't slept for 10 days properly and was emotional, sleep-deprived, feeling depressed about my state, and in general just pissed off from her rant about how difficult her daughter's postpartum had been. I swear to God, something inside me just died. I developed so much bitterness from my husband for exposing me to this emotional turmoil for no good reason. All to keep his mom happy. My mind kept replaying the scenarios in which my husband prioritized his sister and his mom. In my most vulnerable time, he chose to give more value to his mother, who was nothing but a pain to me. I broke down in front of my husband after this cow comment. My husband was furious at his mom. He didn't confront her in front of me, but he was unhappy and expressed this to his mom. The baby won't latch, and I was overproducing milk, so I had no other option but to pump. I hated holding the milk bottles and the wires and the noise of that pump. There was something so animal-like about that pumping experience, and someone seeing me pump like that made me feel terrible. I conveyed this to my husband, and he empathized with me. My mother-in-law also found it funny that a baby's latch could hurt my nipples. Deep inside, I was distancing from my husband mentally. His life had not changed. He could resume work. He did not undergo an ounce of change in his body. My breasts were engorged. I couldn't sit well because of a episiotomy stitch. My hand pained from the drip insertion. My boobs constantly leaked milk. And in this dire situation, there was a woman who laughed at my situation and downplayed my struggles and kept ruminating about her daughter's postpartum situation. Pumping fixed to a chair every 2-3 hours made these feelings worse. My husband constantly tried to make me feel better by small gestures, but the fact that he didn't ask his mom to leave when her presence was constantly so pressurizing to me made me hate him so much. He got me some Stacy wearable pump from a friend's reco. At least it removed the feeling of pumping like a dairy animal. No wires. My physical pain got better because maybe I didn't have to keep sitting with my shoulders straight. Things were beginning to get better. My vaginal bleeding also came to an end. I had delivered normally. Pumping was easier, and also the feeling of not wearing a damn pad reduced a lot of discomfort. My mother-in-law left after 45 days of my delivery because she wanted to show her friends that she stayed for my postpartum period and served me and did all the traditions and whatnot. Best day of my life. I didn't even tell my mother-in-law something like, "Visit us soon," because honestly I was so scared that she might take it as a hint and overstay or come back. But I still had a lot of pent-up rage about the things she told me, like, "You're not the only working woman who has given birth. You should eat fast and look after the baby each second. When will your tummy go inside?" She told my husband, "You need to give some gold to your sister. It is a tradition." All this while, she gave me or my daughter nothing, and expecting my husband to reward the sister for no reason, I decided to undergo therapy, and I am at so much more peace now. The things I uncovered in therapy are a story of another day, but I will remember how she treated me when I was at my most vulnerable self. I have learnt to judge people by their actions solely, not what they say. Her actions made me feel reduced, depressed, and hell, I even considered breaking my marriage. Sometimes, it does trigger my old repressed emotions of how she treated me. But I take solace in the fact that she doesn't stay with us, and I didn't purposely choose for her to be in my life. She has shown me who she truly is, and I am grateful for having seen her true self. I have decided to protect myself and my marriage from her. My husband has accepted his mistake of not placing me first during my postpartum period and apologized profusely. I could never directly breastfeed, but it became a blessing in disguise as I could feed my baby a lot of pumped milk timely and develop a sleep schedule. I made sure she drank enough milk during the day and slept so well at night. With a later positive experience of exclusive pumping, I got the much-needed rest and I could give a benefit of doubt to my husband. My husband drew appropriate boundaries with his mom after this stressful phase of our marriage. He realizes that this could have been an end to our marriage and I am glad he did that. If you're a new mom and are exclusively pumping, don't let anyone make you feel less of a mom, especially not your mother-in-law. Anyway, thank you for watching.